Welcome, everyone, to Global Business in our special coverage of China's annual political season, the Two Sessions. Well, lawmakers have wrapped up their session at the Great Hall of the People today. Chinese President Xi Jinping and NPC Standing Committee Chairman Zhao Leji addressed the closing meeting. Chinese Premier Li Qiang also briefed the press on key issues. Now, joining me in the studio is my colleague Zheng Junfeng, who has been covering the two sessions for us. And of course, we'll also be joined by our correspondents around the world throughout the program. Well, China's political season has ended with the conclusion of the first session of the 14th National People's Congress. Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a speech at the closing meeting this morning at the Great Hall of the People right here in Beijing. President Xi said that it is a must to put the people first on the new journey of building a great, modern socialist country. He also underscored China's efforts in playing a more important role in the world, helping to build a shared future for mankind. Meanwhile, he stressed that China will unswervingly advance high-quality development, and that steps should be taken to enhance the country's economic strength, scientific and technological capabilities, and composite national strength. Take a listen.
On the new journey of building a great modern socialist country and advancing the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, we should unswervingly advance high-quality development. We will fully and faithfully apply the new development philosophy on all fronts and accelerate efforts to create a new pattern of development. We will fully implement the strategy for invigorating China through science and education, the workforce development strategy, and the innovation-driven development strategy. We should work to achieve greater self-reliance and strength in science and technology, promote industrial transformation and upgrading, advance coordinated urban, rural, and regional development, and foster green and low-carbon economic and social development. We should work to effectively upgrade and appropriately expand the economy, and continuously increase the country's economic strength, scientific and technological capabilities, and composite national strength.
And Chinese Premier Li Qiang met the press on Monday after the closing of the first session of the 14th National People's Congress. He said that this year marks the 45th anniversary of reform and opening up in China, which has impacted not only China, but the whole world. Premier Li said China will open wider to the world and welcome investors from around the globe.
From what I learned, most foreign companies are still optimistic about their development prospect in China. Last year, China's utilized foreign investment totaled $189 billion, which is again a record high, and it is even close to $50 billion more than 3 years ago or before the pandemic. And this demonstrates that China remains a popular destination for global investment. Opening up is a basic state policy for China. No matter how the external situation may evolve, we will stay firmly committed to pursuing this policy.
Now, Premier Li Qiang stressed that the government must act according to how people feel, as most people are more concerned about issues like housing, like employment, income, and education. He says China has a huge market and that many industries contain enormous opportunities and still need exploring. Premier Li added that the new government will work to improve the business environment and roll out support measures for private enterprises.
The second point I want to make is that private entrepreneurs or enterprises will enjoy better environment and a broader space for development. Standing at a new starting point, this government will continue to foster a market-based and law-based business environment in keeping with international standards, treat companies under all types of ownership as equals, protect the property rights of enterprises and the rights and interests of entrepreneurs in accordance with law, and we will create a level playing field for all kinds of market entities, and will make further efforts to support private entrepreneurs grow and thrive.
And of course, our very own Zheng Junfeng has been covering this year's two sessions for us at the Great Hall of the People. Jin Feng spoke to a number of deputies from the National People's Congress and members from China's top political advisory body, the CPPCC. So let's get Jin Feng's take on this year's two sessions. Jin Feng, welcome. So you were covering the two sessions for what, about a week and a half? What were your overall impressions of this year's event? Because you were there last year as well.
Well, the overall impression from me would be the stress, the very important stress on China's high quality growth. I mean, the government work report did say about this year's annual GDP growth target around 5%, inflation target around 3%, some budgetary numbers, but a lot of the time had been spent on elaborate China's measures on high quality growth. It was a lot of content on the achievement of high quality growth in the past 5 years and the prospects and the key tasks for 2023. He elaborated 8 areas of high quality growth. We already know the green development, the upgrade of its manufacturing sector, stress on the importance of these technological advancements, coverage of all these rural areas, rural revitalization, the accessibility of the citizens to public services such as medical and those education sectors, and also China's wider and deeper opening up to the world.
Yeah. I mean, I find it interesting because, covering China's economy, you and I both know that China really stresses high quality development and high quality growth as a concept. I mean, why do you think that is? Because today, when Premier Li Qiang met the press, one of the first things, as a matter of fact, the first thing that he said in terms of the economic priority of this new government and successive Chinese governments, I would say, is people-centered first.
Yes.
Right? This is people-centered development here in China. And perhaps it's interesting to make that distinction compared to, say, economies elsewhere in the world, which may just focus on growth, but China definitely has that more of a development component to it, would you say?
It's a natural phenomenon in the world that if the government does not interfere in the economic and social development, polarization would be a natural outcome.
Yeah.
No other experience in the world could prove otherwise. So China's government is stepping in to adapt the social and economic development path so it benefits all of its citizens. That's why we have the notion of common prosperity.
Yeah.
China lifted 800 million people out of poverty with 40 years of fast development. And now the government decides to lift another 400 million people from low income to middle income group to create probably the world's largest consumer market of middle income group.
Yeah.
And prosperity is definitely part of the concept, one of the hallmarks of high quality development.
Yeah.
And that's the only way to avoid middle income trap that many developing countries have experienced in the past few decades.
Yeah. And we have to make that connection between high quality development and China's modernization as well, right? Because China has clearly said this country needs to have high quality development in order to really achieve its modernization process.
Definitely.
All right, Jin Feng, stay with us. Because with China as the world's second largest economy, many around the world kept a close eye at what Chinese Premier Li Qiang said while meeting the press. So let's get more on that with our Nathan King in Washington, D.C., and of course our Jin Feng.
Hi there.
Nathan, good morning to you in D.C. I'm sure Premier Li's press session was closely followed where you are in the United States and beyond. So give us a better sense of the overseas reaction to Premier Li's press conference today.
Yeah, a lot of Western investors know the name and know the person. Obviously, as former head of Shanghai, he was instrumental in bringing Tesla and other big companies to the region. So he's known as someone who deals on an international level with the industries of tomorrow. And that's helpful. And I think there's 3 major points he made which had people at least reassured. First of all, the stability aspect, stable, but also the commitment to opening up no matter what the international situation. Opening up to the outside is our fundamental national policy, and no matter how the international situation changes, we will be unwavering in advancing it. I think that's going to be a very big reassurance, especially consider the US measures that have been imposed on China, there has been no retaliation largely, and that may be the fundamental reason behind it people are talking about. Also, the private sector companies will be treated equally with state-owned companies. That is a reassurance that people need going forward. And I think also just this idea that the US, again, an olive branch to the US, no matter what the geopolitical situation is, the US and China can cooperate and must cooperate. When China and the US work together, there is much we can achieve. You know, this is good talk in a current difficult political environment. And although he said, as we've mentioned before, the 5% growth GDP target will be difficult, this is something that he feels confident but not unrealistic. So I think it's really steady on the ground. And I just want to add one more point. Li Chang is well known, but also other well-known figures haven't been shuffled as much in the part, especially in the regulatory and development area, while key reforms are being passed. So it's steady as she goes as well for foreign investors and watchers on Wall Street for that as well. And considering the contrast we have with what's been going on here in the last couple of days with Silicon Valley Bank and others, steady as she goes and stability is a good message to hear out of Beijing right now.
Well, it's very interesting that Nathan described Premier Li Chang's message as an olive branch to the United States, because it's funny that some Western media have been questioning China's willingness to open up to the world, China's willingness to treat Chinese owned private companies equally with the state companies, because it's Chinese national policy, its national strategy. It's been even written into its constitution that China would unswervingly treat its own private companies very equally, support their growth, and also China would open up to the world continuously, wider and deeper. It's been written into China's constitution. Premier Li Chang stressed that he understands the need of private companies because he worked in Zhejiang province in Wenzhou, where thousands of Chinese small companies grew very well, and he worked in Shanghai, which houses 30,000 foreign companies, including American companies. Look at the achievements of the CRE, the Import Expo, in the past 5 years, which Premier Li Chang attended himself every year. He even knows the square feet of that exhibition area. So there's no question that China will continue to open up to the world. China will continue to support private businesses.
Yeah, I mean, Junfeng, you mentioned Premier Li Chang talking about the CIIE. He was mentioning that the CIIE took place despite the disruptions that we saw from the pandemic. And when we talk about China opening up wider to the world, we see there are now 21 pilot free trade zones here in China. China has now established some 152 integrated pilot zones when it comes to cross-border e-commerce. Last year, we saw another record level in terms of utilized foreign direct investment. The market opportunities are massive for the Chinese consumer market as well. You were mentioning, Junfeng, the middle income group really doubling by the year 2035. We can expect over 800 million people in the middle income group. So I think as China continues to open wider and wider, massive opportunities for businesses all over the world.
Indeed.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us in Washington, D.C. Junfeng, stay with us. You are watching Global Business here on CGTN. We'll be right back after this short break.
Maintaining price stability is still the #1 priority, despite the downward pressure in economic growth.
Well, market openness is always on top of everyone's mind. For overseas investors that we talk to, that's certainly something that people would like to hear more about.
The manufacturing sector is indeed very important from an economic perspective. For China to reach higher income, we need to have productivity growth.
I think that all the institution reform, the main purpose is to streamline the administrative process to further facilitate the economic transformation.
I think that the policy priority is to boost the confidence level of domestic economic entities, including the household and also enterprises.
Well, during this year's Ministers' Corridor of the two sessions, government ministers expressed their insights on China's development and answered key questions concerning people's lives in all aspects, including scientific and technological innovation, ecological protection, and natural resources. Take a listen.
科技部还会进一步加大企业作为技术创新主体。
The Ministry of Science and Technology will further increase support for enterprises to become the main players in scientific and technological innovation. At the same time, the ministry will give full support to any state-owned, private, large, medium, small and micro enterprises that engage in scientific and technological innovation, and we will support them equally in terms of rights, opportunities and roles.
而且呢是刚才讲了，在3个方面平等支持。
坚持生态优先、绿色发展。
And our country takes ecological protection as a priority in economic development. Also, China sticks to the integrated protection and systematic management of mountains, rivers, forests, while coordinating industrial structure adjustment, pollution control, ecological protection, and response to climate change.
生物多样性保护和应对气候变化。
要坚持保护优先。
The Ministry of Natural Resources will accelerate building a natural protection system with national parks as main body. Meanwhile, the ministry will also advance a new batch of biodiversity conservation and large-scale afforestation projects to enhance the biodiversity, stability, and sustainability of the ecosystem.
持续性。
Well, as two of the biggest green finance markets in the world, the EU and China are taking the lead when it comes to green finance regulations. Let's get more on this and bring in our Alex Cartier in Brussels and our Zheng Junfeng. So, Alex, over to you first. What can we point to when it comes to China-EU cooperation on green finance in the past few years, and what can we expect in the future?
Well, one of the main points to point to is taxonomies and part of the EU-China cooperation on the platform on sustainable finance. Now, that is very much an EU-led directive that brings together most of the world's major economies, with the notable exception of the United States on this particular example, where the EU and many major economies around the world, including China, work on defining some of the terms that they will use to legislate for green plans, for green deals, for green legislation, making sure that they're all on the same page on what is defined as green, as defined as sustainable. We've seen a change recently in the EU on what green bonds actually means, because so many companies were branding bonds as green when actually they were some of these projects were for gas and oil projects. So really working together hand in hand, the EU and China there on that taxonomy, those definitions, how to define sustainable finance. In fact, speaking to some of the experts in Brussels, they say, look, China's even pushed the EU a little bit further along when it comes to these taxonomies and really try to insist that the EU improves its green record. So that's been a fruitful partnership, but to be honest, it's probably one of the only areas, that and health, where the EU and China are still working together. There are a lot of tensions, and experts are worried that this cooperation could be jeopardized by geopolitical issues, notably like China's ambiguous position when it comes to the invasion of Ukraine. So if we saw a change in the future, at the moment it's stable, this cooperation on green finance is carrying on, but it could be one of the first things to go, for example, if China chose to support Russia more overtly, or if there was a change in geopolitical situation around the world. So one of those key environmental, sustainable green finance initiatives where the two blocs are working together despite their differences on geopolitics.
Well, since Alex mentioned about geopolitical conflicts, it's exactly because of those conflicts in Europe that made Europe push forward its green agendas faster than they would be willing to do. I mean, Europe is already rolling out a lot of green finance agendas that you just mentioned, but what kind of partnership would they seek to work with in the world? China would be the only partner in their choice, because China has the largest capacity of green infrastructure, of experience in solar, in wind, in hydropower, in nuclear, whatever you can find. And China has the biggest NEV market in the world. China has the most advanced technologies, both in scale and advancement technologies in green technologies. So China would be the best partner for EU to work with in green agendas, and China definitely has such willingness to do it, whether it's between EU and China or with some other initiatives such as Belt and Road initiatives, because we understand all these green infrastructures needs very big investment, it needs long-term investment but relatively low return. but those green infrastructure are the fundamental support to social and economic functions of countries. So definitely China and EU can work and should work together on green agendas.
Well, Jinfeng, of course, you and your colleagues also spoke to a number of NPC deputies and CPPCC members about their take on China's green development as well, right?
Yes, definitely. Me and my colleagues have talked to NPT deputies and CPPCC members, and many of them work in this area, so their experience is definitely worth a listen.
China's economic growth and the dual carbon goals promote each other. The realization of the dual carbon goals is the practice of green development. Green development has brought impetus to our entire economy and driven the development of related industries, including technological innovation and investment in related fields.
The Belt and Road has been fruitful for 10 years, and it has also promoted the cooperation between China and countries along the Belt and Road, becoming a new platform for international cooperation. Examples in this regard are green and low-carbon projects and those involved in improving people's livelihood and other fields.
Well, during the two sessions, we spoke to ambassadors from Israel, Uruguay, the United Arab Emirates, and South Africa for their perspectives on China's high-quality development and what it means for the development of their countries. Take a listen.
Now we know that China is entering a new phase, and this new phase implies this concept of modernization, and we are looking forward to understand better what modernization means.
We will focus on the areas that are of interest to the Chinese economy. Carbon neutrality is #1 priority, and also food security. Also the health sector, we will definitely see this collaboration continue.
The UAE and China are both committed to a common vision of building community with a shared future for mankind. As we look forward to our upcoming presidency of COP28 in Dubai, we will work to ensure that 2023 is remembered as a landmark of climate and environmental action.
China has almost shouldered us the greatest responsibility for the growth, the global growth, and pulling up, particularly post-COVID. The Congress and President Xi Jinping has been talking about high-quality development. This is of great interest for us, particularly South Africa, this high-quality development.
Well, China is Africa's largest trading partner and has been committed to working with African countries to bolster food security and expand agricultural modernization. For more on how the cooperation is panning out, let's bring in CGTN's Robert Nagila in Nairobi for more. Robert, thanks for joining us. So what are we seeing and what can we expect in terms of cooperation in agriculture between China and Africa?
Well, over the past 50, 60 years, China has been sharing its agricultural development experience and technology with the African continent. What this has done is it has helped to boost the continent's food production, it has helped to develop the continent's food processing sector and value chain as well. Now, China has also signed agricultural cooperation agreements with over 25 African countries. This has helped to develop the agricultural sectors in those particular countries by, for example, coming up with the right agricultural policies, training tens of thousands of Africans, not just in Africa, but in China as well, so that they can come back here and put that knowledge that they have learned to use on the African continent to tackle Africa's food security crisis, but also providing the right tools, the right technology, so that Africa is more efficient in its food production. Now, this assistance between the two is not just at the government level, but it also comes down to institutions, partnerships between institutions. For example, Nanjing University financed a biomolecular laboratory here in Kenya at Egerton University, the first of its kind in this particular region, and it gets students from all over the continent. Now what they do is they research on drought-resistant seeds, for example, and they've been very, very successful coming up with various strains, seed strains that do well within drought areas. So there's a lot of these partnerships that have been ongoing, and we expect them to keep going in the future as these partnerships strengthen. Now, through the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation as well, the agriculture sector is a big beneficiary of this partnership between China and Africa, and has been receiving a lot of assistance through FOCAC. So we expect this cooperation between the two to strengthen, because at the bottom of this is Africa's food security crisis, which China has pledged over and over to try and help the African continent solve. Now, there have been some developments on that, but this will continue into the future, definitely.
Yeah, food security is so important for Africa, Robert, as the continent faces increasing risks from climate change. Many thanks for that report. Robert Nagila for us in Nairobi, in Kenya. Thank you. Well, the government work report pointed out that over the past 5 years, China has vigorously implemented its strategy to revitalize the country's rural areas and to accelerate the modernization of agriculture. Let's bring back our Zheng Junfeng for more on this. So, Junfeng, China has a strategy called rural revitalization. Tell us more about that and what it's accomplished so far.
As our African reporter just mentioned, that food security is important for Africa. It's also important for China, with the world's largest population, 1.4 billion people. So China is definitely right in securing food supply. For example, the wheat output has been hitting record for 8 years continuously. We've been securing enough arable land to produce enough food for the people. So China does not suffer from a food crisis in term when the country faces some geopolitical tensions, when the country faces some climate change or extreme weather conditions. That's first priority. Then the country needs to move to the next goal, which is common prosperity, lifting the income of its vast areas of rural areas, farmers' income. So farmers' income need to be lifted through multiple channels, as mentioned by the government work report. So, for example, they can move up the industrial ladder by processing some of the produce they produce from their land. They can do some other work to lift their income when they're not so busy in their land. So many things can be done to lift their income, to help them join the middle income group rather than stay in the low income group.
And I always say I think China has a lot to offer when it comes to rural revitalization and agriculture cooperation, because it's not easy to feed a population of over 1.4 billion people, especially with less arable land compared to other countries in other regions of the world. For example, like Europe, like North America, where you have vast plains where you can plant food. So I think the agriculture technology in China, once that matures more and more here in this country, that can be shared with more emerging
technology upgrade is definitely very important too.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. And thanks for Junfeng for your thoughts on this year's 2 sessions. Now, before we go, here's a recap of the best sound bites we heard from our anchors and reporters at this year's 2 sessions. I'm Michael Wong here in Beijing. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.
The government work report says China aims to expand its economy by around 5%.
And this year's NPC and CPPCC sessions, Chinese-style modernization is undoubtedly the buzzword.
What are the features of Chinese modernization? High-quality development, common prosperity, dual circulation strategy. China cannot become modern without going green.
The international community is also paying close attention to China's 2 sessions and its plan for economic development this year.
What are your views on the 2 sessions this year, and what are your expectations of this year's 2 sessions?
What are the long-term growth opportunities?
What is your outlook for bilateral economic relations this year?